Minister, should Randy Boissonnault still be in cabinet?
Well, I can tell you that the business that Mr. Boissonnault was involved in was never on the Indigenous Business Directory.
Mm-hmm. Do you think he should still be in cabinet?
That's not a decision for me to make, Mr. Ginnis.
Okay. It's interesting that you're not saying yes. Do you endorse his conduct as minister?
I can tell you that Mr. Boissonnault's business was never listed on the Indigenous Business Directory.
He's a cabinet colleague of yours. You work together closely, I would presume. I ask if you think you should stay in cabinet, and you're declining to answer that. Do you endorse his conduct as minister? What do you think of what he has done?
I can tell you that GHI, the business that Mr. Boissonnault was co-owner of, was never been on the IBD.
Okay, I think you're saying a lot by not saying a lot, Minister, so I'll move on to my next question. Is Global Health Imports still eligible to receive government contracts?
I believe they are, but they are, as I said, not part of the Indigenous Business Directory. I can't answer in affirmative.
They represented themselves as Indigenous owned. They did so falsely. They are still eligible to receive government contracts. Do you think there should be penalties for companies that misrepresent their Indigenous identity? Should they be prevented from bidding further on government contracts?
In fact, there are penalties for fraudulent behavior, and I would hope that anybody that is procuring on behalf of the Government of Canada is careful about which businesses they procure from to make sure that proper business practices are followed. And certainly the Government of Canada has measures that it can take if it's found that businesses have acted fraudulently and should.
Okay. You mentioned there are consequences for fraudulent activity, which I hope would include misrepresentations around Indigenous identity. Did Global Health Imports, in your view as the Indigenous Services Minister, engage in fraudulent activity?
I can't make that determination, but I can tell you that the Office of Supplier Integrity and Compliance with PSPC can take steps such as banning a business from future...
Sorry, I'll just jump in because I know there are options available, but okay, you don't want to rule specifically on the case of Global Health Imports. Let's take a hypothetical case. A hypothetical case where you have a company involved in health imports, let's say, that's owned by two people. Hypothetically, one of them happens to be a minister of the Crown. And they are bidding on government contracts and in the process claim to be an Indigenous-owned company. That claim turns out to be completely false. If that hypothetical company, in the process of pursuing government contracts, falsely claimed to be Indigenous-owned, would that be considered fraudulent activity?
It could possibly be, but that would be a decision by the Office of the Supplier Integrity and Compliance. I don't run that particular organization, so I would say that from my perspective, when there's allegations of fraud, it's very serious. And I think departments have a responsibility to ensure that they're procuring from companies that are not fraudulent. So
right, but just definitionally, right? Like it would seem that the definition of fraud is misrepresenting the facts in some way in order to achieve a commercial advantage. Right? Pretending something is true when it's not in order to achieve a commercial advantage. So you have a company that pretended to be Indigenous owned when it wasn't Indigenous owned. The purpose of that pretense was clearly to increase its chances of getting government contracts that it wouldn't have otherwise gotten. Is that fraud?
What I would say is I think we're saying the same thing, that the process of ensuring that people claiming indigeneity should be with integrity, because what we want is we want Indigenous economic success. So I think we agree. And I think that any time that there's fraud in terms of allegations of identity, that is a very serious infraction. Now, what happens next is up to places like the Office of Supplier Integrity, but I can tell you that we, on our side, in Indigenous Services Canada, take integrity around indigeneity seriously. Although it
okay,
is a
and let me jump in here. I would hope the Prime Minister would take that integrity seriously and fire this minister from cabinet. Just in the time that I have left, Minister, are there any other companies owned by Liberal cabinet ministers or MPs, former MPs, or Liberal appointed senators that are on the Indigenous business list?
Oh, that's a great question. I don't know the answer to that, but we can commit to checking that out for you and getting the information back.
Okay, thank you. I think the committee would agree that we're interested in receiving that in the usual timeline, a list, the names of any companies on the Indigenous business list that are owned by Liberal MPs, cabinet ministers, appointed senators, or former MPs.